Hey guys, this is Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and today I'd like to share with you a really universal setup for black against the white's first move, pawn to e4. In this case, I do recommend that you go for the move pawn to d5, known as the Scandinavian Defense, but the main point here that I'd like to share in today's video is that I want to share with you a really simple and actionable setup where you don't need to memorize a ton of variations. You just get the point of the scheme and then you simply execute it over and over again. So what is the setup that you are going to execute right here? You're going to develop your pieces to the most forward, most natural available squares, such as these. Let's just imagine how your setup will look like. Here's the position that you're aiming for. Of course, this is not the exact variation right now. I was not making any moves for white. I'm just showing you the setup. You're going to develop your minor pieces this way. And again, as you can see, it's super simple, really just the most natural squares. And after that, you're going to castle queenside, which also puts your rook into an open file so that it can also do some active job right there. So that is the setup, and after that you will often push your e-pawn forward so that you can open up your dark squared bishop as well as attack the white center. This is the setup that you're going to put in place in all of your games, and now let me show you move by move how specifically you should be doing that. White plays e4, d5, pawn takes, queen takes. Scandinavian defense is considered to be not the most solid, and it is true if you are facing a grandmaster, that is a fairly risky choice. But against players who are below 1500, that's gonna work like crazy. Against players who are below 1800, even below 2000, it will still probably work pretty well. And therefore, I mean, white really needs to be very familiar with the following moves, or else they can even get into trouble. Right, so here we go, queen to a5, aiming for the setup that we were discussing a minute ago. Now, let's say white plays knight to f3 as they need to develop. Here the critical point is that I would suggest that you delay the development of this queenside knight, because if you develop it too early in the game, sometimes it gives white the chance to push their pawn forward here and attack it, or maybe to place their bishop here and put the pin against your knight, and therefore it's better to delay the development of this queenside knight, okay? So instead, right here, you can develop the bishop on g4. So we waited for the white's knight to go there, and now the bishop is active, is pinning the knight. Let's say white will play a bishop e2 to neutralize the pin. You play knight f6. Just like we discussed previously, you still did a little bit postpone the development of the queenside knight. And then let's say white castles, you go knight to c6 at this point. Now, what is white going to do right here? Well, there are a few common options that white chooses. One of them is pawn to h3, trying to push your bishop away. And while you may move it backwards to h5, which is perfectly fine, you may also try to trap your opponent by playing pawn to h5. And the cool thing about this move is that you can actually keep the position of your bishop right there and kind of ignore the fact that it's being attacked. And after that, you can still castle queenside and just continue with your usual plan. And if white ever takes this bishop right here, then you recapture, which opens up the h-file against the white's king, and it is a really deadly thing. What's gonna happen next? Well, basically, your plan is to bring your queen right here, and after that to checkmate the white's queen along the h-file. And actually white is quite defenseless against it. First of all, they would need to move their knight away from the attack somewhere, or even if they do anything else, you still play queen to h5 at this point. And now you're threatening to invade either to the h2 square or to the h1 square with the support of your rook from the h-file, of course, and white is defenseless. If they're trying to provide some escape square for their king, if they play pawn to f3, then you can just lock the king right there, pushing your pawn forward, so the king can never escape via that vital square f2. Let's take a move back here. And if white tries to provide the escape square playing pawn to f4, in this case g3 does not work, as in this case the white's bishop is attacking your queen along this diagonal. So g3 immediately does not work, but of course you will just grab the knight, and after that you keep chasing the king, playing queen takes f4, queen to d4 check, rook f2 is the only way to cover, then pawn to g3, taking advantage of this pin and threatening to grab the rook actually right there, which would be the checkmate. And after white goes queen to f1, there is a standard combination right here, which is worth remembering. Rook to h1, sacrifice, which allows you to play queen to h4 with a tempo, and after that king goes to g1, the only move queen h2, checkmate. Let's analyze a few other main lines here. So you still play for the Scandinavian Defense, pawn takes. No, to be completely honest, knight to f6 here is stronger. And I actually recorded another video about this called the strongest opening for black against e4, where I analyzed those gambit lines, and they are indeed super dangerous for white. But the only subtle drawback there is that you do need to be prepared. You do need to know a couple lines there, as they're more complex. And the line we're analyzing today, queen takes d5, is just a more simpler option, alright, even if it's not as strong. Therefore, the choice is up to you, whether to go queen takes d5 right here or to play knight to f6. Both options are fine. Alright, anyway, today let's focus on queen takes d5. Now, let's think what else can white play here. Instead of knight to f3, let's say they decide to push their pawn forward, which also makes sense. In this case, we still, first of all, develop your kingside pieces, kingside knight to f6. Just like we talked about previously, we a little bit postpone the development of this queenside knight. Let's say white goes knight to f3. In this case, it enables you to play bishop g4, installing this pin once again. So let's say white goes bishop to e2, and now you finally play knight to c6. At this point, you can already see the point of developing your queenside knight last of all. Now if white tries to change in your knight, which a lot of your opponents will actually, because it's just a tempting move, in this case you don't want to retreat with the knight, you actually castle queenside, just following up with your plan, and here the rook starts working its job along the d-file. Now the next move, if white plays any random move or whatever, you just grab the pawn right here. Winning the pawn, getting a great game. And if white seduces themselves to capture the knight, hoping that they're winning the piece and you're blundering something, then of course rook takes d1. In fact, they just blunder their queen. I just played a few moves back. Even if white doesn't play that wrong move pawn to d5, which actually loses that pawn at least, if not losing the queen, even if white simply castles here, after you castle queenside, all of a sudden, all this pressure that your pieces put onto the white's position become really unpleasant for white. Even though it seems white just played all the natural, normal development moves, but somehow they find themselves in trouble. For example, how do they protect this pawn on d4 right here? Because you are actually threatening to capture this pawn. For example, if white would play any random move, let's say pawn h3 or anything else, you can just take this knight right here, and after that you grab the pawn on d4, which also, once again, puts this really unpleasant opposition of your rook against the white's queen. Now let's take a few moves back to see what white could have tried to do to protect their pawn on d4. Let's say they would play bishop to e3 to protect the pawn this way. In this case, you can bring some more fuel into your attack by playing pawn to e5. Now you're still taking advantage of the pin along the d-file, so they can never grab your pawn or else they would lose their queen. But at this point, I guarantee that a number of your opponents will miscalculate the line knight takes e5. They would think that after you take the knight, they would be able to take your bishop with a check. But the thing is, here, after you take right here, they capture on g4. Now you've got this extra knight, which previously was standing on c6, but now it's right there. You can just grab the bishop on g4 with your knight, and you're winning a piece along the way. All right, once again, let's take a few moves backward here and try to figure out what white can do here. If they try to get rid of that annoying bishop from g4 and play pawn to h3, then you take it right here and take on d4. This time you can do it with a pawn, which also wins one of the white's pieces. Actually, I remember I won some local blitz tournament and got some prize money just using this setup for black all the time against e4, so you may give it a try as well. On a side note, if you ever thought of turning your passion chess into profit, then let me also invite you to become a partner of our Remote Chess Academy. If you have any chess website, social media page, or any chess community, you may also recommend our chess courses to your fans, and this way that'll be a win-win for everybody. If you're interested, you can click the link in the description and get to know all the details. Good luck with your chess battles, and feel free to let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about the Scandinavian Defense.